Hello, me again, Aaron Imholt from the Steel Toe Morning Show, here to do a video on not really Orlando. Taking on that topic is too big right now. There are too many moving parts, and quite frankly, we don't really know enough about it yet. But I figure we could take on one part of this, and that is the part that when these things happen, seem to always be the fallback debate that we have, and that is about firearms in the United States. We won't talk about radical Islam. We won't talk about culture. Yes, culture, not race. There's nothing about Islam that is racial. It is simply cultural. Radical Islam has as much to do with race as Pearl Harbor had to do with feminism. These are two completely unrelated things. So we get to guns. Now, let's start with what we have in common. I think this is something we don't start with very often when we talk about firearms. The fact is, people who are ardently pro-gun control and people who are ardently pro-Second Amendment want the same thing. We don't want to see this happen anymore. We're absolutely tired of it. We can't take it. But we just have different ideas on how to get there. Now, people on the gun control side most likely didn't grow up in a culture of firearms. They didn't grow up with a family that owned them, and most of them haven't fired them themselves. Likewise, people on the Second Amendment side tend to heavily sway percentage-wise towards gun ownership. They have a vested interest in the debate. They believe that their guns could be taken away with the right amount of regulation. And certainly, this is not something that is unprecedented in human history. In fact, it's more the norm than not that people's private right to defend themselves is confiscated by the state. So, where does that leave us with the debate? Well, everybody wants to save lives. We start there. I believe that about 80% of each side of this debate is flexible, meaning there's a compromise to be found. 20% of gun control people want a blanket gun ban. They hate guns. They don't understand them. They also don't get statistics on how communities that adopt concealed weapons permits usually see a drop in violent crime, and how the United States has seen a drop in violent crime of almost 40% over the last 20 to 25 years. Those are all big numbers. People on the gun rights side of it, I'd say about 20% of them say hands off, no regulation, forget it, none whatsoever. As Ted Nugent said, the Second Amendment is my concealed weapons permit. That leaves 80% of us. Now, those of us on the gun rights side of the debate, which I will come out as pro-Second Amendment, we do believe that you can instill certain regulations, that there are certain checks and balances to be had. In fact, we've caved in on a lot of them. In many states, the gun control people have been winning this fight for years and years. The gun rights folks have been caving. If you read the Second Amendment, there aren't little caveats, there aren't little addendums. It's very clear. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Gun rights people, I think, deserve a little bit of credit. They have allowed that right to be infringed upon quite a bit, and a lot of gun control people seem to get upset, or they seem to be angry when gun control people finally put their foot down and say, you can't have any more. You've taken enough. I've given you enough caveats on a constitutionally protected right. If we had put as many caveats on the First Amendment as we have on the Second, free speech advocates like myself would be, ironically, up in arms. But let's talk about some of the proposals that I think make a little bit of sense. Number one, should someone who is on the terrorist watch list be allowed to own a gun? No, when you say it like that, of course not. Of course they shouldn't. Until you consider that your constitutional rights cannot be taken away without due process of law. This is where we have a problem with big government. Big government passed something called the Patriot Act, and the Patriot Act plays really fast and loose with the Fourth Amendment. When you talk about due process of law, there's no due process in putting you on a terrorist watch list. It's a very arbitrary list. Therefore, being on it doesn't necessarily mean you're guilty of anything. And I think a lot of people, even pro-gun control people, have a level of discomfort with punishing someone for an act they haven't been convicted of in court. However, on the flip side of that, on the gun control person's defense, when someone is just accused of domestic violence, their guns are taken away for safe measure and the protection of everyone else. Perhaps you extend that to the terrorist watch list. That's something you can leave in the comment section below. When it comes to concealed weapons permits, I think what gun control people need to understand is that a lot of these mass shootings have happened in places that we call gun-free zones. Now, don't debate it, don't argue it, don't discuss. These are just facts. Schools, bars in Orlando, even the Fort Hood shooting happened in places where guns were to either be checked or not allowed in the area, gun-free zones. It's easy to pick off a lot of people. In fact, James Holmes, the Colorado shooter, drove past many theaters that allowed concealed weapons to get to one that did not allow them. Fact, fact, fact. Gun-free zones create a more fertile breeding ground for the kind of terror we saw this weekend. Now, is it the only condition for a mass shooting? No, but it is pretty much a necessary condition for a large-scale mass shooting. Obviously, if someone was there with a firearm, the damage would have been mitigated, would have been limited. Somebody could have defended themselves. Same with Bataclan Theater in France. If you think that gun control will always keep you safe, always, 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 you have to look no further than the largest mass shooting in Western civilization in many, many years, and that is the Bataclan Theater attacks in Paris. The idea that all guns are bad and that private ownership of guns in general is not good. I'd like to show you something. This is my gun. I like to have it for home defense. It's a DP-12 double barrel pump action repeater. Pump it once, you fire right barrel, left barrel, and then you pump it again. It repeats. It holds about 12 to 14 rounds depending on what size shells you're using. And it's a great home defense tactical shotgun. Aaron, that looks like an alien gun. Why do you have it? Because if someone is coming into my home, I live in a split level here, I'm facing upward towards the entryway, and that person comes in the door and is threatening myself and my family in the middle of the night when I have to go get this. It's loaded with shot. It's not loaded now, of course, but when I load it, and it's loaded with shot, I don't have to be insanely accurate in the middle of the night. You point, fire once, fire twice. I have a very large percentage chance of neutralizing the threat. That weapon will not be used by myself in a mass shooting. Why? Because guns don't commit mass shootings. The individual in control of it is. That firearm is not to blame for anything it does. I am. Just like the guns used in Aurora, just like the guns used at the Bataclan, just like the gun used in Orlando, etc., are not to blame for what happened. And it's very important that we start these gun arguments with that fact, not opinion. Fact, a gun by itself, sitting on a table, cannot harm anyone. Until a person gives it purpose, gives it a mission, and gives it action, that gun cannot hurt anyone. My DP-12 is not a problem starter, it's a problem solver. So when we're talking about guns, remember these key points. We all want the same thing. Heated debate is okay. People yelling at each other is okay. They're passionate about guns. We don't want this to happen anymore. We want the other side to see our point. There's nothing wrong with live, spirited debate. Number two, a gun is never to blame for a crime. A gun can't do it by itself. Number three, and this is very important for the gun control crowd, you do not have the right to take my gun away. You can ask, why aren't we more like Europe? Well, Europe doesn't have a Second Amendment to any of their constitutions. It is why it's been a continent that's been ripe for tyrants over the years, and the United States has not so far. We have a Second Amendment, and I'm sorry to say, as Ben Shapiro once said, it's not for hunting, it's not even for home protection. The Second Amendment was put in the Constitution specifically so an armed populace, if the time ever came, could defend itself from tyrannical government. We're not there, may not ever get there, but it's a nice safeguard to have. It is a bulwark against tyranny. Now, the other thing that gun control advocates need to understand is that this is not your right to take away. You inherited the Second Amendment from men and women who have fought, bled, and died to protect those rights. So when you talk about blanket gun bans, know that that's a non-starter and you should move to a country that has blanket gun bans. Because in the United States of America, we inherit our rights from our forefathers. Men and women much smarter than ourselves, who sacrificed a lot more, gave a lot more, and risked a lot more. Those rights are not yours to give away. Those rights are not yours to decide who gets them and who doesn't. The Second Amendment, much like the First, is sacrosanct. So let's have that debate. Let's have it within those parameters, and let's work together to find out how to save lives. The Steel Toe Morning Show airs every Monday through Friday, 5 to 9 a.m. on Rockin' 101.7 in St. Cloud, and of course you can listen online at rockin101.com. Thank you for watching.